There is a dangerous myth that haunts our culture of achievement. It is the myth that victory is the end of the story. We see it in the final scene of the movie, when the hero, having vanquished the dragon, stands triumphant on the mountain peak as the credits roll. We imagine that after the massive project is completed, after the championship is won, after the great goal is finally achieved, what follows is a state of perpetual, blissful rest. But anyone who has ever truly poured themselves into a great and costly endeavor knows a different, more complicated truth. They know that sometimes the most dangerous and vulnerable moment is not the moment of struggle, but the moment immediately after the victory. It is the moment the adrenaline vanishes and the monumental cost of the battle finally comes due. It is the moment we don't feel like a hero on a mountain peak, but an empty vessel at the bottom of a well. There is no more powerful, honest, or psychologically astute portrait of this post-victory collapse than the story of the great prophet Elijah. It is a story that serves as a sacred text for anyone who has ever experienced burnout, depression, or the profound exhaustion that can follow our greatest achievements. And it is a story that reveals a God who is intimately acquainted with the anatomy of a human breakdown. To understand Elijah's crash, we must first witness his triumph. The scene is Mount Carmel. It is the apex of his entire career, a moment of epic, Hollywood-level confrontation. Elijah, a lone prophet of Yahweh, stands against 450 prophets of the pagan god Baal. The nation of Israel is in the midst of a profound identity crisis, wavering between two loyalties. Elijah proposes a definitive test. 2 altars, 2 bulls. No fire. The God who answers by fire, he declares, he is God. What follows is a day of high drama. The prophets of Baal shout, dance, and even cut themselves in a frenzied attempt to summon their God. But there is only silence. Then, Elijah steps forward. He is calm, deliberate, almost theatrical. He rebuilds the broken-down altar of the Lord. He has them douse it with 12 large jars of water, so much water that it fills the trench around it. He is making the miracle impossible by human standards. And then he offers a simple, quiet, confident prayer. And fire falls from heaven. It consumes not just the sacrifice, but the wood, the stones, the soil, and even the water in the trench. It is a moment of absolute, undeniable, spectacular vindication. The people fall on their faces, crying, "The Lord, He is God." Elijah then commands the execution of the false prophets, a brutal act that solidifies his total victory. This is the ultimate peak experience, an adrenaline surge of cosmic proportions. Elijah has faced down the entire corrupt system and won. He is at the absolute summit of his power and purpose. And this is where the movie would normally end. But the Bible is not a movie. It is psychologically relentless. The news of his victory reaches the pagan queen, Jezebel, the power behind the throne. And she is not impressed. She is enraged. She sends a single messenger to Elijah with a simple, chilling threat. "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them." And what happens next is one of the most shocking and relatable reversals in all of Scripture. Elijah, the man who just called down fire from heaven, the man who stood alone against 450 enemies, the man who has just been vindicated by God in the most spectacular way imaginable. Panics. The text says, Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. How do we understand this? Is it cowardice? Is it a sudden loss of faith? Number. It is a nervous system collapse. It is the anatomy of burnout. For months, perhaps years, Elijah has been running on pure adrenaline, living under constant threat, fighting a lonely battle. The confrontation on Mount Carmel was not the beginning of the war. It was the final, exhausting battle. He had used every last ounce of his spiritual, emotional, and physical reserves to win. And now, with his adrenaline gone and his body and mind utterly depleted, a single credible threat is enough to shatter his resilience. He has nothing left in the tank. The triumphant hero is now a traumatized man running on empty. He runs a day's journey into the wilderness, distances himself from his servant, and collapses under a solitary broom tree. And there, in the desolate silence of the desert, he prays one of the most heartbreaking prayers in the Bible. "I have had enough, Lord," he said. "Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." This is a portrait of severe clinical depression. Notice the classic symptoms. First, suicidal ideation. Take my life. He has lost all hope and all will to live. Second, a sense of failure and worthlessness. I am no better than my ancestors. His great victory now feels meaningless. He sees himself not as a triumphant prophet, but as a total failure. Third, profound isolation. He has physically isolated himself, and as we will see, he is trapped in the cognitive distortion of terminal uniqueness, the belief that he is utterly alone in his struggle. This is the bottom, the ash heap of the soul. And it is here, in this moment of utter desolation, that the story reveals its most profound and beautiful truth. It reveals the nature of divine compassion. God's response to Elijah's breakdown is a masterclass in gentle, therapeutic, and trauma-informed care. As Elijah lies sleeping under the tree, an angel touches him. The first intervention is not a word, but a gentle physical touch, an affirmation of presence. The angel says, "Get up and eat." Elijah looks, and there by his head is a cake of bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. The first prescription for a spiritual and psychological breakdown is not a theological lecture. It is not a call to more prayer or more faith. It is food and water and rest. It is a profound acknowledgement that we are not disembodied souls. We are physical beings, and our spiritual and emotional health is inextricably linked to the state of our bodies. God's first move is to care for Elijah's exhausted, depleted physical self. Elijah eats and drinks, and then, overwhelmed by exhaustion, he lies down again. And a second time, the angel comes and touches him, saying, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." There is no impatience. There is no, "You should be feeling better by now." There is only a deep, compassionate understanding that healing is a process. It requires more than one meal. It requires patient, repeated care. This is a sacred moment. It gives all of us permission to be human. It tells us that in our moments of burnout and exhaustion, the most spiritual thing we can do is often the most practical. Get some sleep, drink some water, and eat a nourishing meal. If this simple, profound idea of a God who cares for our bodies before our beliefs lands with you, let us know by liking this video. Strengthened by the food, Elijah then travels for 40 days and 40 nights until he reaches Horeb, the mountain of God. This journey itself is part of the therapy. It is a long, slow period of decompression. It is a journey away from the source of the threat, away from the pressure of his ministry, into a space of solitude and silence. When he arrives at the mountain, he takes shelter in a cave, and the word of the Lord comes to him with a gentle diagnostic question. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" God invites him to tell his story, to give voice to his despair. Elijah's response is the classic cry of the burnt-out soul. He unloads his entire narrative of grievance. "I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." It is a story of profound loneliness, a feeling that his immense effort has been for nothing, and that he is the last faithful person in a world gone mad. It is, factually speaking, not entirely true, but it is Elijah's emotional truth, and God lets him speak it without correction or interruption. Then, God gives him a strange instruction. "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." And what follows is a profound deconstruction of Elijah's own expectations of God. First, a powerful wind tears the mountains apart and shatters the rocks. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there is an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake comes a fire, the very element of his greatest triumph on Mount Carmel. But the Lord was not in the fire. Elijah, the prophet of the spectacular, the man who dealt in fire and drama, is being taught that God is not confined to our experiences of Him. The way God showed up in our last victory may not be the way He shows up in our present crisis. And after the fire, there comes a sound. The original Hebrew is famously difficult to translate. It is often rendered as a still, small voice, or perhaps more accurately, a gentle whisper, or even the sound of a thin silence. It is the opposite of the storm. It is the opposite of the fire. It is a presence so gentle, so quiet, that it can only be perceived when all the noise has stopped. The God of the spectacle has become the God of the whisper. And this is a profound grace for a man whose nervous system is shattered, whose soul is burnt out. Another dramatic display of power would be overwhelming, perhaps even terrifying. He doesn't need another earthquake. He needs a whisper. God meets him not at the level of his own infinite power, but at the level of Elijah's profound human fragility. Elijah pulls his cloak over his face, goes to the mouth of the cave, and the question is repeated. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And Elijah gives the exact same speech, the same story of his zeal and his loneliness. The trauma is still speaking. And now, finally, after tending to his body, after giving him space, after meeting him in the gentle quiet, God begins to address his mind. He does not offer platitudes. he offers a new perspective and a new purpose. First, God gently corrects his distorted narrative of being the only one. He tells him, "Yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed down to Baal." You're not alone, Elijah. Your perception is not the whole reality. Second, God gives him a concrete, forward-looking mission. Anoint a new king over Aram. Anoint a new king over Israel. And third, and most importantly, anoint Elisha to succeed you as prophet. This is the ultimate act of grace for the burnt-out leader. God is giving him a successor. He is telling him, "Elijah, this entire story does not rest on your shoulders. You are not the only one. There is a future that is not solely dependent on your strength. I am giving you an exit strategy. I am giving you help." He is relieved of the crushing burden of being the indispensable man. This ancient story is a divine protocol for recovery. It teaches us that burnout is not a spiritual failure. It is a human condition that deserves a compassionate and deeply practical response. It shows us a God who honors our physical limits, who makes space for our emotional despair, and who meets us in the quiet whisper when the fire has died down. And it reminds us that true healing often concludes with a renewed, and this time sustainable, sense of purpose. So let's close with a small, practical application of this divine protocol. A live benefit for our time together. A simple diagnostic for your own life. Let's call it the Juniper Tree Audit. Take a moment right now or later today and honestly ask yourself the first questions the angel asked Elijah. They are not complicated. Have I slept enough? Have I eaten a real meal recently? Have I had enough water? So often, the journey back from the edge of burnout and despair begins not with a grand spiritual vision, but with the radical, sacred act of compassionate care for our own exhausted bodies. It begins with bread and water and rest. If this story has given you permission to be tired, to be human, and to seek rest without guilt, then you understand the heart of what we do at Soul Scripts. Subscribe to continue exploring a faith that is deep enough to hold our full humanity. And in the comments below, share just one word that describes what you need most in this season of your life. Words like rest, quiet, nourishment, or permission. Let's create a space that honors our limits. Thank you for being here.